In the 5th generation of Monster Hunter, two members of the Fated 4 flagships from Generations got their own subspecies, with each one offering varying degrees of challenges and a unique hunt compared to their original species. Iceborne gave Glavenus an acidic subspecies that has more dexterity and control over its tail attacks and offers an offensive moveset that reduces a hunter's defense, while Sunbreak gave us a flashier and fiery version of Mizitsune that offers attacks and moves that are both spectacular and breathtaking. These two members of the Fated 4 from Generations were definitely well treated with regards to their subspecies that they've been given. But what about the other two members? Astalos is now present in the same game as the Mizitsune, but has no subspecies to accompany him. And unfortunately for the Gammoth, the poor thing is as relevant and alive as the animal it's based on. So in this video, we will be discussing what sort of subspecies these two members of the Fated 4 might receive in future Monster Hunter games. More specifically, how they will function and behave compared to their original counterparts, and we will find out how these supposed future subspecies could learn from the acidic Glavenus and the violet Mizitsune. It is never too early to talk about things that could happen or will happen in a future Monster Hunter game. After all, the majority of the Monster Hunter community has contributed to this little subculture. I mean, for God's sake, most of my content since I've been making these kinds of videos have been about speculation and guessing what new monsters might be introduced. Though regardless, it's pretty fun to discuss, and with Sunbreak reaching its peak within the coming months, I could honestly say that now is a good time to guess at which monsters should honestly get a new subspecies to accompany them. Of course, the monsters that we'll be talking about that should get a subspecies is the aforementioned Astalos and Gammoth, two members of the much beloved Fated 4 flagships that were introduced in Generations, and quite honestly two monsters that should be given more attention and fanfare. Meanwhile, Glavenus has always been seen as the leader of the Fated 4. I mean, he's literally in the cover art for the game, and in my personal experience, Mizitsune is honestly the hardest and more fun fight out of the whole group, which definitely contributes as to why the Glavenus and the Mizitsune were brought back first and had their separate subspecies. Glavenus came back to Iceborne to much fanfare because Generations was seen as a spin-off game as opposed to a mainline game, so seeing a monster from a spin-off was quite a big deal back then. And it would make loads of sense to give him his own subspecies, because what's cooler than a giant dinosaur that uses its tail as a greatsword? A giant dinosaur that uses its tail as a longsword. And for heaven's sake, Acidic Glavenus has the best opening cutscene in all of Iceborne, hands down. As for Mizitsune, it is obvious as to why they brought him back. A Japanese setting, a monster whose aesthetic and equipment fits the game's motif, and the fact that World completely ignored Leviathans, Mitsu had to come back. No ifs or buts, this thing needed to return no matter what. His return was handled fairly well. His theme got revamped to be even more weebish, and of course his violet relative was one of the most fun and engaging title update inclusions of all 5th generation. With all this love and attention given to both the Glavenus and the Mizitsune, you kind of feel a bit sad that the other members of the group feels a bit abandoned and left out of the fun. So how about we return the favor to both the Astalos and Gammoth by giving these two their own unique subspecies. Starting with the Astalos, which at the very least did make his appearance in 5th generation, but without any subspecies to come along with him. Now we know that this flying wyvern functions by moving its body around and conducting thunder through its body to power itself up. The more electricity that it absorbs, the Astalos stores it in whatever part of its body to perform powerful attacks. So what would I propose to spin this around and create a subspecies out of this knowledge? Well, to make a ice variant of the Astalos that uses cold winds and temperatures to freeze parts of its body to perform new and powerful attacks like the Gosarag. And instead of using ice as some form of armor like the Vulcan or Zamtrios, this polar Astalos uses ice for offense and only offense. Just unrelenting attacks that encases hunters in snow and ice. Okay, now I just know what you're about to ask. Why ice? It seems pretty uninspired because I'm just flipping its weakness and turning it into its own monster. Though one reason for why I would choose this is the idea of a much more aggressive and unique version of the Legiana, with some mix of the Gosharag, but with more ice in different body parts, and seeing as just how stunning the Astalos looked in Sunbreak, I'd figure it would be very interesting to see how Astalos' insect aesthetic would look if it was a snow-based creature. After all, other than the Banabra, there really isn't any insect-like monsters that you'd find in snow or ice maps. Although with the abilities that I've explained, it might make this Astalos sound way too similar to the Zamtrios or the Velkhana from earlier, in terms of using ice as a way to enhance its attacks. Which is why instead of using ice as an armor to power itself up, Ice Astalos uses it to power up its body parts, and only its individual body parts, and changes their form instead. One thing that I would think would help this ice-based Astalos to gain from something like the acidic Lavinus would be to be more methodical and calculating with its attacks. Normal Astalos can be very erratic and wild when it's fully charged up with thunder, so it would be a cool twist to have a fully frozen Astalos to be more controlling and precise when it's in its fully powered up form. Now onwards to my girl, my baby, my favorite monster in all of Monster Hunter, the Gammoth. Me loving this monster to bits means I know all about her, and this means all the aspect that makes her the least liked member in all of the Fated 4. It simply breaks my soul that the majority of the fanbase just does not love this massive fluff ball like I do. And unfortunately I understand why. She's slow, her fight can be boring, she's too massive, and she's just not as exciting or fun as the other three. And that just makes me sad. I bloody love this thing ever since I first fought her. And it's sad that she's the only one out of the Fated 4 that did not make her return in 5th generation. So, what sort of subspecies should the Gammoth have for when she eventually comes back in a future game? Right, hear me out. A dragon-based Gammoth that's a bit smaller but faster and more aggressive than a normal variant. I'm talking a plus-size Stygian Zinogre mixed with Ebony Odogaran levels of aggression. And instead of snorting out snow to attack hunters and make armor out of it, Dragon Gammoth blows out Dragon Blight to power herself up and attack hunters like the Deviljho. She can still live in snow-based maps like the Stygian Zinogre and Deviljho, but without any snow-based attacks. Just an all-out Dragon Blight rage when fighting this thing. Going back to Deviljho, you can have this Dragon Gammoth to perform wide sweeping dragon breaths to cover ground and hit hunters who are far away. Plus mobility and coverage to make sure players won't find this fight too boring. Less snow and size on her means she'll be able to move around more and attack hunters more. Less uninteresting stomping attacks and more charging and aggression when fighting this thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, she's still a Gammoth, which means she's still bigger than most monsters. So witnessing this absolute unit coming at you with more speed and mobility will be utter chaos, which means more fun. Veering off a bit, Violet Mizutsune was a very flashy and a spectacle based fight in Sunbreak, with moves like a giant flame bubble hovering around in the air. And Violet Mizutsune's theme changing midway through the fight was a interesting experience to say the least. When I first fought Gammoth, just seeing how immense she was when you're in the same area as her was a spectacle in itself. It's a massive animal that you're fighting and you're not in a special arena or a siege map. Now I figured something like the Violet Mizutsune's floating fireball in the sky moment could benefit Dragon Gammoth. Maybe she could make a massive Dragon Blight ball that she can carry with a trunk around, and then using it as an ultimate move that one-shots people. Or she could power herself up in Dragon Blight like the Stygian Zinogre, then changing appearance and moveset. Jesus Christ, I wish this could happen, because I just really love this monster to be honest, and knowing that she's not on the same pedestal as the Glavenus or any other flagship monster just annoys me. Though, in any case, to conclude this discussion, what ideas would you have with regards to these two members of the Fated 4 and their subspecies? And it doesn't even have to be these two specifically. Flagships like the Seregios does not have their own subspecies, so please feel free to leave out any ideas as to what they could have in future games. And with that out of the way, I wish you all the best, and until next time.